Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Marked twice, loved once. Episode 13. Chapter 144. Alpha Leo's POV. Looking at her, I realized she had changed a lot. She had grown more beautiful and more mature than the last time I saw her. Her black hair had grown longer, falling gracefully on her back, while her sea blue eyes beamed with clarity. Her nose, her lips, they all looked alluring and pretty. She looked a bit leaner too, which only made her prettier. She had changed so much that her beauty seemed to be on another level now. I couldn't help but admire her, also praising her for taking care of herself despite the situation she was in. She noticed my gaze on her and looked at me with a raised brow. "What? Is there something on my face?" she asked, and I laughed. Her innocent look was worth dying for. Well, you look prettier and a lot more adorable than before," I commented, and saw her cheeks turn red. She was blushing. She picked up her coffee and drank from it, as if to hide her red cheeks, but it only made me want to laugh even more. To lighten the mood, I decided to ask a question that had popped into my mind and cleared my throat. "How long will you be staying here in Francisco?" I inquired. She raised her head to look at me. "A month," she replied, causing my eyes to widen. A month felt like a long time. "Why did you come back here?" I asked. I knew well that the moment she left, she would have vowed never to return. Seeing how she didn't show up in California or Francisco for the past 4 years, it was clear she wasn't planning to return. This made me wonder what changed her mind. She lowered her head as she sipped her coffee. "My dad. He was sick, so I had to return to take care of him," she said, and I could sense the reluctance in her voice. She wasn't okay with being back. She wouldn't have returned if not for her father. I sighed and sipped my coffee, too. "I'll be leaving for California in 2 days. I'd be glad if you could pay my pack a visit before you return to London," I said, and she nodded. "Okay. I'll do that," she assured me, and I stood up. "I'm leaving now. I'll be expecting to see you soon," I told her, and she smiled before standing up too. "I'll definitely do that. I promise," she said, and we hugged. I left her there and stepped out of the cafe. As I walked down the street, I cursed myself, wishing I had made a different choice back then. Rejecting Nora even without knowing her was a mistake, and if I hadn't done that, life would have been easier for all of us. She would have been happy with me, and I would have been happy with her. Our marriage would have been full of love, not the pain and anger she feels now. I was full of regret, hating myself for being so foolish. "You can't continue like this, Leo. You've been blaming yourself and living in regret for the past 4 years. Don't you think it's time to forget everything and move on?" Ethan asked, and I sighed. I wished it were easy, but it wasn't as simple as one might think. I had tried my best to forget and move on, but it had all been in vain. Without saying a word, I continued walking down the street. Then, I felt something, a strange feeling, but one I was familiar with. I gasped and paused. "Stop!" Ethan shouted, but I had already stopped. I waited for him to speak, to let me know what was going on. "Mate," he yelled, and my eyes widened. I had suspected, but hearing it from Ethan confirmed it. I looked around, and Ethan directed me to the east, where I saw a superstore and dashed in. Inside the small superstore, 2 ladies were shopping. I searched with my eyes, waiting for Ethan to guide me, but he didn't. "Our second chance mate isn't one of them?" I asked, confused. Yes. Our mate is no longer here, Ethan replied, and I frowned. What? I asked, looking around the superstore more, but there was really no one apart from the two ladies. She left already, he replied, surprising me. How could she leave when I had rushed here upon hearing about her? Where could she have gone? I rushed toward the cashier and asked, "Who is the lady who just left?" He looked at me with confusion and shook his head. He didn't recognize me, which was understandable. "I'm sorry. I don't know the person who just left. We have many customers, and I can't remember them all," he politely explained. I grunted, not bothering to talk to him any longer. I dashed out of the superstore and started looking around the area, but she was still nowhere to be found. I was scared. I had waited for my second chance mate for so long, and I hadn't been able to meet her once. Would I ever see her again if I missed her today? My heart raced, and I was restless. Even after running around and searching everywhere, I still couldn't find her, and my fear grew. I returned to the front of the superstore, frustrated. Realizing she was no longer there, I decided to talk to Ethan. "Ethan, does this mean I have a second chance mate somewhere?" I asked. "Yes. I could feel it, and I knew he or she was here before I directed you here. I don't know how he or she left so fast, but I'm sure the person is our second chance mate," he replied, and my heart raced again. I had always thought I wasn't lucky enough to have a second chance mate, not knowing I actually had one. The joy was indescribable, and the urge to find her intensified. I had to find my mate, no matter what. I needed to claim her before she got snatched away again. This time I didn't bother or think about what she would look like, all I just wanted was my mate. Quickly, I took out my phone, dialed a number, and it rang for a while before being answered. "Hello," I said as I put the phone to my ear. "Good afternoon, Alpha Leo. I'm sorry for not answering earlier. I was busy," he apologized. I nodded, not concerned about his delay in answering. "I'm in Francisco right now, and I want you to do a job for me," I said, emphasizing the urgency. "What job, sir?" "I'm here for you anytime," he said. I sucked a deep breath, then turned to look at the superstore's name before focusing on the call again. "I'm in Love and Life Superstore, Francisco. There should be a CCTV here. I want you to hack it and get me some footage. I need to find something, and it should be there around." I paused to check the time. It was already 2:15 p.m. "Yes, cut the video from 1:30 p.m. to 2 o'clock and send it to me. I need it urgently," I instructed, and heard keyboard clicks before he replied, "I'm on it, right away. I'll get it and send it to you soon," he said, and I ended the call. I looked around the area again, but it was still the same, my mate wasn't around. I grunted and walked back into the superstore, hoping she would have returned, but she still wasn't there, and I became bothered once again. Will the CCTV capture her? What if she did not walk in a place where the camera would see her? What should I do then? I kept mumbling, growing increasingly frustrated. Francisco was a very big city, and there was no way I would be able to find someone in such a big place, someone I hadn't seen before, at that. "Don't worry, they will find her," Ethan assured me, and I nodded. I left the superstore and boarded a cab. I described where I was going to the cab man, and he took me there. After arriving, I entered the apartment. It was an apartment I had acquired for the convenience of my business trips. I took off my clothes and had a cup of water. Just as I had taken a seat, my phone rang. "I've sent the video, sir," he said, and I ended the call. I opened the file and began watching. I watched and watched, but there was no one of significance in the video. My wolf didn't howl at anyone. As I was about to give up and close it, I spotted someone familiar, so I rewound it to see her again, and my eyes widened. "Ava!" I called, disbelief evident in my voice. "Mate!" Ethan howled in my head. Lord Madison's POV. I was restless, different thoughts were playing in my mind, and I started pacing around the moment I got home. The words Nora said to me refused to leave my head, and I couldn't help but think about them. Was she right? I was confused. Not knowing what to do, I decided to ask my wolf. "Darren, what do you think about what Nora said? Do you think she might be right?" I asked him, and he was silent for a while before he replied, "I don't think so. Our bond is still on her, so she can't do that without us knowing," he said to me, and I frowned. "Then, what about the small boy I saw with her? Who is that boy, and who is the father?" I asked as I could not wrap my head around it. "That's what we need to find out. First, we need to check the boy's date of birth to find out if he is the same age as she claimed and if she got pregnant this same month she claimed," he said, and my frown deepened. "What are you insinuating, Darren?" I asked him. His words were becoming clearer to me, but they confused me more. I wondered why he was saying that. "The baby might be ours, Madison. It might be from the same pregnancy 4 years ago," Darren claimed, but I felt like laughing. How was that possible? I was there when the doctor said she lost the pregnancy, then how could she be pregnant again after she left? "Think of something else, Darren. What you just said is not possible. I heard the doctor myself when she said the baby had been lost, and I was there when she lost so much blood, and there was nothing I could do to help her." "That baby is gone, Darren," I explained to him in case he had forgotten. I knew that wasn't possible, his reply made no sense to me. "Anything can happen, Madison. In the world, anything can happen," he said, and I nodded my head, but deep down, I knew he wasn't right. I knew he was wrong, but I was tired of arguing with him, as that wasn't even the right moment for that. I needed to think about who the father of the boy might be. If Nora got pregnant and gave birth to a baby boy, I needed to know it. While I was thinking about what to do, a knock came on the door, taking my attention. "That's lunch." "Lunch has been served," Darren said to me, and I groaned. "I don't feel like eating," I replied to him, and I was about to tell the maid knocking when I realized I hadn't been eating for a while now, so I stopped myself and cleared my throat. "What is it?" I asked, trying to act like I didn't know why she knocked. "Lunch is ready, my lord," she said from outside the door, and I nodded. "Okay. I will be right there," I said to her, and I could feel her presence gradually disappear until I could no longer sense it. I stayed in my room for a few minutes longer before I left the room and went downstairs to eat the lunch that was prepared. On getting there, I realized the maids were still arranging the table, so I sat down and waited for them. A few minutes later, I felt the presence of someone coming towards me, and I frowned. The scent was familiar, and I knew who it was, but I was too surprised to utter a word. What was she doing in my house? The last time I checked, we only saw each other once a year, and this wasn't that time of the year. I watched her come closer, and she stood in front of the dining table, staring at me, but I only looked away without paying attention to her. The maids greeted and welcomed her, but her gaze continued to be on me, while I didn't care. "Can I sit?" she asked, and I shrugged. There are plenty of seats available here for you to sit, I said coldly and picked up a cutlery that was already placed in front of me. You can go ahead now, my lord, the maid serving the table said, and I nodded as I started eating, but what was annoying was that the maid served her too without my consent. We continued eating without saying a word to each other, but a few minutes into the meal, she opened her mouth and asked, "How have you been doing?" I was reluctant. I felt like I shouldn't answer her, but I still decided to do that anyway. "I'm fine," I said simply, and she sighed without saying anything else. I raised my eyes to look at her, and I realized she looked pale and sick. "What's wrong?" I asked her, and she raised her head. She revealed a weak smile and shook her head. "Nothing is wrong with me. I'm perfectly fine," she replied, but I knew she was lying, and her eyes said it all. Her eyes looked dead, so much so that I could feel her pain through them. "You don't need to tell lies or try to act strong. Just tell me what's going on," I asked her, making sure my cold voice never turned warm. She shook her head again and was about to continue her lies when I dropped my cutlery and glared at her. "Tell me what's wrong with you," I said to her, and she finally sucked in a deep breath as she lowered her head. "I'm not feeling well. I've been sick for a while," she said, and I furrowed my brows. "Sick? Why aren't you calling healers to heal you? You are a werewolf, and you can heal quite fast. Why are you still sick?" I asked, and she sighed again. Her expression changed to that of bitterness as she dropped her cutlery. "I've called healers from different packs, but none of them could heal me. They tried their best, but nothing was working," she explained to me, and my heart sank. I was worried about her. She was never this sick, and it was rare for werewolves to be sick. Even if we fall sick, healers would always be able to heal us, but she said they couldn't treat her. Somehow, I was scared of the unknown, and I worried for her. "What's wrong with you? What kind of illness is it that healers can't heal?" I questioned her, and she raised her head. "It's cancer. Cancer of the blood," she said, and my eyes widened. "Cancer of the blood?" I asked, and she nodded. I closed my eyes and grunted. I felt frustrated and worried about her. "How many healers have you called?" I asked her, and she fell into deep thought for a while, as if she was trying to count them, before she looked at me and sighed. "I've visited many famous healers, but none of them could heal me. They all tried different things, but nothing has worked so far," she explained, and I groaned. This is bad. The fact that famous healers couldn't heal her meant that the cancer had deeply eaten into her, and it was already jeopardizing her life. She could die if she did not get treated. Although I had no relationship with her and I hated to admit that she was my mother, I still could not let her die. She was my only family apart from Nora, and I couldn't afford to lose her to death. I cleared my throat and looked at her. "Give me your hand, let me check," I said to her, and she looked at me. She seemed surprised for a few seconds and didn't reply. I said, "Give me your hand, let me check," I repeated myself, and she made an "oh" sound before wiping her hand with the handkerchief and placing it in mine. I closed my eyes, trying to locate the area where the sickness was in her system, and before long, I found it. "It's there. I can heal it," I said to Darren. He was quiet for a while before replying, "Yes, you can, but not now," he replied, and I frowned. "I can, but not now? Why not now?" I asked, confused. "You'll have to take the sickness into your body, and you can't do that now because you're still healing from the one you did for Nora's father. You can't take in another one," he explained, and I groaned. "Damn! The whole thing had gotten complicated. I opened my eyes and dropped her hand. I raised my eyes only to see her expectant expression, and I secretly rolled my eyes. I can heal you, but that will be in a few days. You should come back then, I said to her, and a smile crept onto her face. Thank you. I'm truly grateful. I didn't expect you to want to treat me, she tried speaking, but I interrupted her. No matter what, you're still my mother, and I can't watch you die, I said to her as I started eating again. And you can't return to your villa for now. You'll have to stay here so I can monitor your health for now, I said to her, and she nodded. Thank you very much, Madison. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't a good mother. I'm sorry, she tried apologizing, but I waved my hand to stop her. Stop. All that is in the past. You should focus on your health for now, I groaned and looked away. Nora's POV. It was late already, but I knew he wasn't sleeping. I walked toward his bed and sat beside him, and as expected, he opened his eyes and turned to me. Mum, he called softly, and my heart melted. Yes, my baby, I replied, happiness brimming in my voice. He opened his eyes wide and gave me a curious glare. Hope you are not here to sing me a lullaby. I'm sure you know I'm not a kid, right? I'm a grown-up big boy now, and I can sleep without lullabies, he said and pouted, which made me so surprised that I couldn't help but chuckle. I stared at him for a while with a big smile on my face. Seeing my son so mature and smart was a big win for me, and it warmed my heart every time it popped up in my mind. I tucked him in well and inhaled. Hope you are comfortable here? You haven't slept in another place except our home before. Are you okay here? I asked him as I was worried. We never left my home in London since I gave birth to him, and I was worried that the sudden change of environment might affect him. Julius shook his head and smiled at me. No, Mum. I love it here. I'm comfortable here, and it feels like home too. Grandma is nice, Uncle Maxwell is sweet to me too. I love it here, Mum, he said to me, and I sighed in relief. It would have been a problem if he wasn't comfortable here because I wouldn't have a choice but to return to London, which mustn't happen yet. But, my mother is a nice person. I felt like laughing at that compliment. If only my son had known what kind of grandmother he had, he wouldn't have said it like that, and I wished I could correct him. But then, was it not okay to think she is nice, so he could at least live happily here for a month? I was still deep in thought when Julius tapped my hand, and I looked at him. Mum, who was that man? He asked, and my heart raced. Which man? I stuttered. I already knew who he was asking about, but I was too taken aback. The man you were speaking to this afternoon. You didn't reply to me yet, and I want to know, he asked, and I could see the curiosity in his eyes. I knew he wanted to know who the man was, and he must have been thinking about kinds of stuff, but there was no way I could tell him the truth, and I felt guilty about that. He is a friend. I told you earlier. He is just a friend, I replied to him, hoping he would stop talking about Madison. But he sat up in his bed and looked at me. Mum, that man, are you sure he is just your friend? He asked me, and I nodded. I've been dreaming about him, Mum. I've been seeing him in my dreams even before I saw him today. That was why I recognized him the moment I saw him, and I wanted to know who he was and why I saw him in my dreams, he said, and my eyes twitched. I looked at him with a squinted eye. What did you see in your dream? What was he doing there? I stopped myself, closed my eyes, and breathed in to calm myself before I revealed a forced smile. Tell me, son. What was that man doing in your dreams? I asked him, and he frowned. I always see myself playing with him. He would buy me ice cream, bake with me, train me, and do all sorts of sweet and happy things with me. That man in my dreams acts like my father, and he cherishes me so much like a father would. Is he my dad? He asked, but I quickly waved my hands. No. No. He is not your dad. He is never your dad, and he can't be. He is just a friend I knew here in Francisco before I gave birth to you. I tried convincing him, but the only word that came out of his mouth was "oh." Before he looked away. He didn't believe me, and he wasn't happy with me either. Seeing the situation, I decided to change the topic, and I thought about what to talk about until something came to my mind, and a smile appeared on my face. Yes, Julius. What would you want Mum to give you on your birthday? Your birthday is in a few days from now, and I'm sure you want something from Mum, right? I asked him, and he turned to face me. He was in deep thought for a while. I waited and waited, and I had already thought he wouldn't answer me because he was angry before he opened his mouth. You will give me anything I want? He asked me, and my eyes lit up. Of course. I can get you anything for your birthday because you are my pretty boy. I said with a big smile on my face. What could a 4-year-old son want that I couldn't give him? I was confident I could get anything he wanted for him until he opened his mouth. I want my dad. I want to see my dad on my birthday, and that's the birthday gift I want from you, Mum. He replied, and I froze. I couldn't talk as I just continued staring at him. Just once. Even if it's just once, can you please let me meet my father? He asked again, and my heart sank. I had tried so much to keep him hidden, thinking I was only doing the right thing by keeping him away from Madison and he would never have to see that bad father of his forever, but he wants to see him now? For his birthday? I was speechless, nothing was coming out of my mouth even when I opened it. Mum, please. Let me see my father. I just want to see him, even if it's just once. He pleaded again, and I opened my mouth. I wanted to talk, but my words got stuck in my throat again. Can't you do this for me? Can't you let me see my father? Mum, please, can I see him just once? One time is enough for me. I just want to know who he is, he continued pleading, and I had had enough. I was done listening to him, so I held his shoulder and made him lay back in his bed. Go to bed now. We will talk more about this tomorrow. It's late already, I said to him, as I found it hard to stay with him any longer. My mind was a complete mess, and I had a lot to think about. So much that my head was already pounding. Sleep tonight, and we will talk about this tomorrow, I said again as I covered him up with the duvet. He nodded his head, and I kissed his forehead. I cupped his face with my hands and smiled at him, saying, I'm sorry. In my heart, I walked out of his room and returned to mine. I was restless, and I started pacing around the moment I entered my room. The dream he said had refused to leave my head. He acted like my father. He cherishes me like a father would do, Julius's voice kept ringing in my head, and it felt like I was going to lose my mind. He wanted to see his father, and I knew my son well enough, he wouldn't give up until I showed him his father. What you are doing is not right, Nora. How could you deny Madison from seeing or knowing about his son? He has every right to know about him, and you know this. Why are you acting like this? Lolita scolded me, and my blood boiled. I was angry. How could she? How could she not be on my side too? How could she not know my pain, even if others don't? What do you mean? Am I the bad person here? Did you not know when Madison pushed me then, and I nearly lost my child? What if the baby had died? Would he have come back to me to demand the dead child, or would you all have told me to hand over my womb to him when the baby was gone? Would you? I yelled, my eyes moist with tears. I was frustrated enough as it was. I expected Lolita to reply to me, but she didn't say a word. She didn't reply to any of my questions, and a single tear rolled down my eyes. I hated the way everyone was trying to make me the bad person when they clearly knew what Madison did to me 4 years ago. With a groan, I walked over to my bed and was about to lie in it when I heard a familiar voice, and I frowned. Was that a voice? Madison's voice? Nora, the voice called again, and my eyes widened. It was Madison's voice. It was the first time I would be hearing his voice in my mind since I left him 4 years ago, and it was a bit strange. What's it? What do you want? I asked him coldly. Have you forgotten that we made a deal? I want to see you tomorrow, he demanded, causing me to frown. I was frustrated and bit my lower lip, with my eyes closed, forcing out the answer, okay. I groaned and ended the mind link. Writer's POV. Madison kept pacing around his room, checking his watch with a frown on his face. He had been waiting for Nora for a while already, but she was yet to show up. She promised him she would be with him by noon, but it was already past 1 and she was yet to show up. He was bothered, thinking she had changed her mind about visiting him, and with that thought, he left his room and went downstairs where he saw his mother. He walked over to the dining table without saying a word to his mother and poured himself a glass of water, which he downed in one go. He dropped the cup, grunted, and checked his watch again. Are you waiting for someone? His mother asked, and he rolled his eyes secretly. He wanted to ignore her, but he decided to answer her when he remembered she wasn't feeling fine and the last thing he wanted was for her to worry about the illness she already had. Yes. I'm waiting for Nora, he replied, and his mother's eyes widened. She revealed a proud smile as she looked at her son. Really? Have you guys settled the dispute between you? Are you cool now? She asked many curious questions, excited for her son. She wished to see her son happy and she was glad that there was someone out there who could make him feel that happiness and bring her back into his life. Madison looked at his mother and sighed. It's complicated, he said simply and turned to drink more water. His mother was about to ask for more details, but she stopped when she noticed he wasn't in the mood to explain more to her. She noticed he wouldn't tell her more than he already had, and she sighed. Okay then. I want to get something from my room. I might come back to see you later, she said and excused herself, leaving the quiet Madison alone. A few minutes later, Nora walked in and bowed slightly when she got to him. I'm here, she said and raised her head to look at him. Madison breathed a sigh of relief. He was happy to see her when he had already thought she wouldn't come. He was about to offer her a seat when she turned her back to him and started walking toward the stairs. She was about to climb the first step when she stopped and looked back at him. Won't you come? Are we not getting down to business right away? She asked, extinguishing the little excitement in Madison's heart. He was shocked. He stared at her without being able to utter a single word for a while as he didn't expect her to be so bold. He thought she would be the one to try to avoid intimacy with him, but she was asking for it the moment she arrived at his house. Nora, how about you eat something first before we go to my room? He asked her, trying to change the situation and make it right again, but she shook her head. I don't have that much time. "Meet me in your room," she said and started climbing the stairs. Throughout her climb to the last step, she didn't look down once to see the heartbroken Madison who stood rooted in his position for a long time. He was devastated and he felt suffocated. He pulled on his shirt and grunted. "Why are you doing this to me, Nora?" he asked himself, sighing. He thought about leaving her in the room without joining her, but he decided to see her, hoping he might be able to change her mind. He went up the stairs and reached the front of his room. He hesitated for a moment before he pushed the door open and entered. His eyes widened when he entered the room. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Nora already undressed, wearing only panties. Disappointment clouded his desires as he walked toward her with a solemn face. "Let's not do this yet, Nora. I have something to say to you," he said as he stood in front of her. The reason he had called her over was to discuss with her, apologize to her, and see if he could change her mind. But this? He wasn't prepared at all, and it wasn't his intention either. Nora smirked. "I don't think I have much time to dilly-dally with you. I'm here for this, and I don't have anything to say to you. Let's just get this over with so I can return home," she said. His face was full of pain, and he was sad. He was so sad that he felt his heart clenched, but he endured it and tried to ask her the question that had been piercing his heart like a bloodthirsty sword. "Nora, would you rather be my partner than come back to me? Would you prefer this over being my wife again?" he asked her, hoping she would stop at this stage, hoping fear would lead her to change her mind, but Nora removed her hand from his, took a step back, she looked at him and nodded her head. "Yes, this is better. I'd rather be your partner for a month than return to you, Madison," she said, a smirk creeping onto her face. "Shall we begin now, or should I remove the panties too so you can see the whole package before we proceed?" she asked coldly, but Madison shook his head. "No, I'll remove the rest." "Let's start this," he said as he moved closer to her and grabbed her waist. He was in pain, he felt hurt, and there was a big lump in his chest that refused to go away no matter how hard he tried to push it down. He captured her lips and started kissing her. The kiss was rough as his heart was aching, but Nora felt no pain. She wrapped her arms around his neck. She hated this, she wanted to get it over with, but she wanted to give it her best while she was at it. Madison, on the other hand, trailed his hand from her back to her neck and deepened the kiss. It was as if he wanted to take in her entire being, but he stopped himself. "No, I shouldn't hurt her," he said to himself as he broke the kiss and looked at her. He was tired of talking to her, and he didn't want her to talk either because each word felt like arrows to him, piercing his heart and causing immense pain. He grabbed her waist again and pushed her until she was standing in front of him. He grabbed her shoulder and pushed her onto the bed, making her lie on her back, and his eyes went through her body. Everything was supposed to move him, they were supposed to make him lose his mind like he always did back then, but it wasn't working at the moment because his heart was bleeding, his pain was much more than he could imagine, and he hated what he was doing at the moment, but he knew there was no point in stopping. She tried to stop herself from complimenting him, but only she knew many times she had praised him in her mind, and she wanted to enjoy this more. Madison planted a few kisses on her belly. He was a bit excited. She is this tight only because she hasn't done anything with any man since she left me. She lied, after all. But, what about that boy? He asked himself inwardly, but he shrugged it off and started thrusting into her with his fingers. In and out, he increased the fingers every minute until it got to 3, and he stopped, but he increased his pace. Hearing her soft moans was like a melody to his ears, and it prompted him to go faster and faster until he felt her tightened, and he knew it was time for her to release. "Are you ready?" he asked, and she nodded. His shirt had been removed by Nora before, so he only removed his pants, and he groaned. He wondered when it became like that, when he felt like he had not enjoyed, but he decided not to think about it and continue with what he was doing. Nora was looking at him with a wish in her eyes, and it was obvious she wanted him. He looked at her for a while and a single tear rolled down his eyes, but he immediately wiped it before she could see him, and he started, and with each thrust, he felt like his heart was tearing apart, and he wanted to stop, but he continued. The pain he was feeling was indescribable, and he felt like bearing out his heart, but he continued anyway and his thrust increased. He refrained from hurting her, but his emotions were taking over him, and he couldn't control the momentum of his thrusting. The sound of their bodies slapping against each other resonated in the room, and the moans from Nora made it louder. "Don't release in me," she warned with a moan, killing everything in him. He continued this way until he saw that Nora was already pleasured and tired. Heartbroken and in pain, he withdrew from her, sat on the bed, and with tear-filled eyes he covered his head with his palm and let out a grunt. Nora's POV: the moment he pulled out of me, I closed my eyes and let out a silent, deep breath. Part of me enjoyed, while another part felt like I shouldn't have. A part of me wanted to rest and continue, perhaps because it had been a while since I last did it, but I knew I should be content with this. I opened my eyes to see what he was doing, but he had his back turned to me, and I frowned. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but I kept quiet. With a soft grunt, he left the bed and walked toward the bathroom. I was planning to visit the bathroom to wash up too, but I suddenly realized he hadn't finished inside me. I looked at the bed where he stood up from, and even on the ground, but there was nothing there, and I was confused. Different questions popped up in my mind, and I felt bad toward him. I felt like I no longer had the power to move him anymore, like he no longer saw me as an attractive person he could fully have with, or maybe because of the harsh words I said to him. Every part of me wanted to ask him what was wrong, but I refrained and picked up my bra, which was at the edge of the bed. I knelt on the bed to put it on, but I realized my body was sticky, so I climbed down the bed. "I should take a bath," I said out loud. I walked over to where I dropped my dress, picked it up, and dropped it on the bed too before turning around to head toward the bathroom. I opened the bathroom door, but my eyes widened when I saw him taking a bath there. I had totally forgotten that he had entered the bathroom when he stood up earlier. He looked at me and then looked away, as if I were just a mere side distraction. I thought about leaving, but then, why should I? I entered the bathroom and stood in a corner, where I observed his body and his well-defined chest with which he had just satisfied me. This was once my man, and his body was once mine. I felt no shame looking at him. He paid no attention to me, even when he knew I was checking him out. He continued taking his bath. It took him almost 10 minutes before he picked up his towel, wrapped it around his chest, and left the bathroom. He closed the door behind him, and I grunted. I stared at the door for a while before I entered the bathtub. I closed my eyes to feel the coldness of the water, and that was when I heard Lolita's voice. "What are you doing, Nora? Don't you think you are taking this too far? He is feeling so sad and lonely because of you. Have you forgotten he is our mate?" Lolita questioned me, and I rolled my eyes, ignoring her. I took a quick bath and left the bathroom. Returning to the room, I saw Madison already dressed. He was wearing jeans and a shirt, a casual outfit, but he still looked breathtaking. I stared at him for a few seconds before I walked toward the bed, picked up my dress, but dropped it again and went to stand in front of the mirror. I picked up the hairdryer, dried my hair, and applied lotion. It was the same one I used at home, so it was okay for me to use. After that, I walked back to bed, picked up my cloth, and put it on. I intentionally removed my towel before wearing my cloth, exposing my full body, but he didn't spare me a glance. I put on my panties and picked up my gown. I was already wearing my gown when he turned to face me. He walked toward the bed and sat in it, facing me. "Tell me, whose kid is that?" he asked, and my eyes widened. "I already told you I had a one-night stand," I replied. I didn't expect him to ask me any questions, as he hadn't been talking to me for a while, but his question was too much for me to process in a short period too. The answer that came out of my mouth was a lifesaver, and I was glad I had told him that before. He looked at me and frowned. "Okay, I will believe you, but I need to know the name of the bar you were and what day it was," he said, and I raised my eyes to look at him. I gave him a mocking gaze as I asked, "What are you saying? What does that have to do with you?" He stood up from the bed and moved closer to me, but I took a step back. "Because I need to prove your point. You said you had a one-night stand with a stranger, right? I will go to the bar, ask about their CCTV, and search through the videos to find the man you spent the night with," he said, and my heart shook violently. I knew Madison well enough to know that he could do what he said, and it scared me to think that he would find out I was lying. He could go to any bar I mentioned and try to find the man I claimed to sleep with, that was how persistent he was. I closed my eyes, steadied my breath, opened my eyes, and looked at him. "I don't know how that concerns you. Why should you interfere in my and my son's life? What's your business with us?" I asked with a loud growl as I zipped up my gown and walked closer to the bed, but he stood in front of me, blocking my way. I could feel his anger, and I knew I had already provoked him. His eyes looked sad and angry as he glared at me. "Yes. I'm concerned. What happens to you is my business because you are my mate. Have you forgotten that we are still married? And if we think about this rationally, the baby is mine," he replied, and my heart sank, but I kept a strong front. "The baby is yours? How can he be yours when you already lost yours a few years ago? Have you forgotten how you pushed me and made me lose the pregnancy? Do you think the baby would come back from heaven?" I yelled at him, and he was silent for a while. It seemed the loss of the baby still affected him greatly. He ran his fingers through his hair and groaned. I feel connected to the boy. The last time I saw him, I felt like he was my son. That child should be mine, he said, and my blood boiled. I glared at him for a while before I rolled my eyes and looked at the ground to find my heels. Seeing them by the left side of the bed, I walked toward them and put them on. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. "I'm leaving. I guess I'm done here," I said to him and turned toward the door, but he grabbed my hand, stopping me, and I turned to face him. "If you keep insisting like this, how about we run a DNA test? If the baby is not mine, then I will stop all this." "Isn't that good for both of us?" he asked, as if he were making a deal, but my heart wouldn't stop racing. I was scared. The DNA test would make him realize that the son was his. I rolled my eyes, trying hard to conceal my emotions as I glared at him. "My son will never take any test with you. You don't have the right to tell me what he can do and what he cannot do. He has a father, and I know his father, which is not you." I yelled at him and tried to release my hand from his, but he was stronger. "Let go." I yelled at him again, and he released my hand. I looked at him one more time before I stormed out of the room with anger. I walked down the stairs, still brimming with anger, until I saw his mother sitting in the living room. She noticed my presence the moment I descended the stairs, and she turned to look at me. "Oh, Nora! You're here," she asked cheerfully, and I nodded. I was angry, but the last thing I wanted was to worry the old woman. "Yes, Ma," I said to her. "But I need to leave now. There is somewhere I must get to," I said to her, and I was glad she understood as she made way for me. I smiled to her and rushed out of the house. I entered my car and drove out of Madison's mansion. So many thoughts were racing through my head, and they were already causing a headache as well as frustration. I started thinking about many things, and before I knew it, I was already in front of Maxwell's house. I got out of the car and rushed inside. "You're back," he said, and I nodded. "My son?" I asked, and he smiled. "He is sleeping upstairs." "What's wrong? You seem to be panicking," he said, noticing the cold sweat running down my forehead. I looked around the house and sighed. I had rushed home with the hope that Maxwell would be able to help with some ideas, and I desperately hoped that would be the case. Madison said he wants to run a DNA test. He said he feels connected to Julius, I explained dejectedly, and saw his eyes widen. He was lost in deep thought for a while before he let out a deep breath. "This is bad, very bad. If he wants to do the test, he will surely do it no matter what," he replied, and my heart sank again. Alpha Leo's POV. I had been suffering from sleepless nights since the day I saw Ava in that video. I kept wondering if she was my mate, but my mind kept saying no. I had been with Ava for a while, and I never felt any connection between us, so why now? I hadn't seen her for years already because I stopped seeing her when she confessed to me about the poison stuff. Maybe she felt too ashamed to show up in front of me. She never visited my mansion again, and I had no reason to call for her either. So, for the past 4 years, I hadn't seen her once. Why did I never feel it? She was always with me back then, and we've kissed even once. I stopped as I remembered the moment when I wanted to transform, and she walked over to me. Unexpectedly, she kissed me, but I pushed her away. Even with that, I still did not feel any connection between us. What could have gone wrong? Why did it happen that way? I asked Ethan, as I was too confused about the whole thing. "Probably because you were still connected with Nora then. Nora was our mate then, so it wasn't for me to detect another mate," he said to me, and I understood him. I felt the urge to speak to Ava again. It had been so long that I missed her, and I wished to see her again. I tried connecting with her through the mind link, but she kept blocking me. I tried again and again, hoping she would reply this time around, but it was still the same, and she kept on rejecting me, making me frustrated. I sat up in my bed, ran my fingers through my hair, and climbed down from the bed. "She is not responding," I said to Ethan, and he was quiet for a while before he replied. "Connect with her again," he said, and I sighed. I tried connecting with her again, but it was still the same result. She refused to accept the mind link, and I got frustrated. I started pacing around the room, thinking about what to do to make her talk to me. I wished to at least talk to her, ask her about how she had been, and try to find out if she was fine. Maybe I can also ask her what she was doing in Francisco when I saw her on the CCTV, but there was no way I could do all that if she kept rejecting the mind link with me. I tried connecting again, and this time, she accepted the connection, and I was elated. "Ava," I called gently. "Yes, what do you want?" she asked reluctantly. It was neither anger nor sadness, it wasn't even disappointment, and it confused me. I wanted to figure out what she was thinking with her voice, but it was hard, and no matter how hard I tried to study the tone, I had no idea. Nothing much. I just want to see you. Can we meet? I asked, and she was quiet for a while, seemingly thinking about what reply to give me. I don't want to see you, she simply said, and I frowned. I walked toward my mirror and returned to my bed. I was getting frustrated again. I saw you at a superstore in Francisco. I rushed to see you, but you were no longer there by the time I got there. Can we meet and talk? There is something I must let you know, I said to her, hoping she would agree to hear me out or at least get curious about why I wanted to talk to her. But her next reply made my stomach churn. I know exactly what you want to see me for, I know what you intend to talk about, but I don't care. I don't want to hear anything, she said, and I furrowed my brows. I couldn't believe what she said to me. So, you knew? You knew and you didn't try to reach out to me and even blocked me from connecting to you? I asked with surprise in my voice. So, you knew we are mates? You knew you are my second chance mate? I asked again, but she kept quiet and sighed. Okay, I mumbled and sucked in a deep breath to calm myself. Where are you? We need to meet, I said to her. Where are you? I will come over to your place instead, she replied, and my eyes twitched. I sighed again and nodded my head, that was okay too. I'm in my apartment here in Francisco. I will be here, I was about to explain more to her, but I realized she already ended the mind link, and I growled. I turned to face the bed, dropped my phone, and was about to sit down when I felt a presence in the room. I turned my head only to see Ava in my room. Mate! Mate! Ethan screamed excitedly. She had teleported to my room, and I was surprised. I didn't expect her to know where I was because it was a place I just got, and I did not remember telling her about the address when we were talking earlier. How did you know this place? I asked her, but she only looked at me and looked away the next moment. I was about to talk again when I noticed her looks, and I realized how much she had changed. Her hair became longer, and it fell smoothly on her chest. Her color looked brighter, while she became kavya and slimmer than before. She was oozing, and it took me a great deal not to get too mesmerized by her beauty. She noticed I was staring at her, and she turned to face me. Why are you staring so much? Stop staring at me, she mumbled, and I chuckled. Mate! Mate! Ethan shouted again, and he was trying to push me toward her, but I held myself back and cleared my throat. So, you knew? You knew all along that we are mates? I asked, and she nodded. Yes, I knew from the first time I saw you in the bar that you were my mate. Well, she stopped and turned her back to me. The truth is, I knew before then, she said, and I was confused. I could remember vividly that I hadn't seen her at all before the day we met at the bar. Unless she was talking about when we were kids. So what was she talking about? I don't get you. You found out before we met at the bar? How? I asked, confused. She turned back to face me, and her expression was still a puzzle I couldn't fill. She opened her mouth but closed it again and averted her eyes from me. She looked around the room, and I did the same. You want to sit? I asked her, but she shook her head and raised her head to look at me again. It seemed she was trying to look at everything else but not me, but she had no choice anyway as I was standing right in front of her and so close that she could never be able to avoid me even if she wanted to. I knew about you the day you returned to California after your studies, and I had been looking for opportunities to approach you. However, it wasn't possible until you decided to throw a welcoming party, to which most people were invited, and I went there too," she said and paused. "My intention that day was to harm you as a part of my revenge, but I couldn't carry it out because I discovered that you were my mate before I could go through with it. So, I had to leave without fulfilling my mission," she explained, walking towards the bed. She wanted to sit down, but she stopped herself and headed towards the window, where she peered down at the town. "I also met you at the club and the bar, where you asked for my help. All those times, I already knew you were my mate," she added, leaving me shocked. I had never imagined that Ava could be my mate. She had always been a trusted friend, and it stayed that way until the day she confessed her motive, causing a rift between us that lasted for years. Hearing that she had been my mate for a long time surprised me greatly. It was a lot to process. If we have been mates for a long time, even before my official rejection with Nora, so does that mean the moon goddess unmated Nora and I the very day I saw and rejected her? When you knew all of that, why didn't you tell me? You should have informed me, I said to her, feeling annoyed. I knew I shouldn't, but I somehow felt foolish for not figuring it out earlier when she had been right by my side. Why would I have told you when you were head over heels in love with Nora? I was even supposed to harm you, but the bond between us kept stopping me. How could I have revealed the truth then? She asked, and I grunted. She was right. So, what do we do now? We're mates. What do you think we should do? I inquired, and she shrugged. Does it even matter? She questioned, looking at me. We need to do something, I responded, and she rolled her eyes. The only thing we can do is for you to reject me. You should reject me as your mate, she demanded. Nora's POV. I was in my room, combing my hair, but my mind wasn't at rest. I couldn't stop thinking about Madison and what he might be doing at the moment. It had been 3 days since I went to his place, but he never called or connected with me through a mind link to even ask about Julius. It was calm, but it felt more like the calm before the storm, and it was scary. His silence could only mean that he was planning something or already doing something, and I wondered what it was because I knew it would surely be about Julius. I was still deep in thought when I heard Lolita's voice. He is here. Madison is here, Nora, she said to me, and my eyes widened. I stood up, dropped my comb, and sat back, panicking. What was he doing in Maxwell's house? Did he plan to ask me about Julius? Different thoughts went through my mind, and it only made me more scared than I already was. He mustn't meet Julius. I stuttered out loud to Lolita, who refused to reply to me. But I rushed toward the door, opened it, and left the room. I had to get downstairs before he could meet Julius. I had no idea what he had come to do, but what if he tried to take his blood or anything that belonged to him that might be used for the DNA test before I got there? I couldn't take the risk and I increased my pace. I rushed down the stairs with the hope that I would reach my son first. But my heart sank the moment I got downstairs and saw Julius already talking to Madison. They were chatting, and the two were smiling as if they had known each other for a long time. I felt my heart skip several beats as I ran toward them with anger in my veins. Julius! I yelled, and the two turned to me with confusion in their eyes. I stormed toward them and grabbed Julius's hand, pulling him behind me. I glared at him. You! Didn't I tell you not to speak to strangers anymore? Did I not warn you to stay away from strangers and not talk to them at all? I yelled at him, and he looked at me with weary eyes. But, Mum, you said he is your friend, he defended while staring at Madison, who kept looking at me without any expression on his face. Friend? I asked, and my heart sank again. I had indeed told him Madison was my friend. Still, he is my friend, not yours. So, he remains a stranger to you. Do you know him? I asked Julius, but he just stared at me without saying a word, and I grunted. You don't know this man, so he remains a stranger to you, and you shouldn't be found talking to him. When a stranger talks to you, I've always told you to run away from them or maybe run to your room and close the door, Julius, I said with frustration in my voice, looking at him to see if he had any marks of Madison touching him. I knew it was crazy, but I was crazy at that moment. Okay, go upstairs and wait for me there, I said, making him turn away from Madison. He turned to look at Madison one last time before he nodded and walked toward the stairs. I watched him climb the stairs reluctantly and only breathed a sigh of relief when he was already out of sight. Let's talk outside, I said, turning to leave without sparing Madison a glance. I walked out of the house and only stopped when I got to his car. I turned to face him and saw him behind me. What do you want? I questioned, and he looked at me without saying a word. If you want me, you can call me, right? Why are you here? I questioned him again. Well, he said and shrugged. He seemed to find my reaction amusing, and it irked me. I'm here for the DNA test I told you about. Go in and get me anything that belongs to him. Be it his toothbrush, his cup, or anything that he uses alone. Yet, his hair would be preferable because I don't want him going through a blood test. What do you think? He asked, and my blood boiled. The fear I felt earlier had all turned to anger, and I wished I could just explode at that moment. I won't give you anything. Not his hair, not his toothbrush, nothing. How can my son be yours? Do you think the dead one would come back to life? I asked him with a mocking gaze, but he wasn't moved at all. If you don't want the DNA, how about you give me his date of birth certificate? I want to see that, he asked, and I laughed. Really? Is that what you want? Of course, I will give that to you if that's what you want. I said to him. Deep down in my mind, my joy knew no bounds because I knew the date of birth would convince him that the boy wasn't his. I carried Julius's pregnancy for 10 months instead of the usual 7 months, which meant that he was 3 months overdue, and Madison would never imagine that. He would think I was right, which was a good thing. I will give that to you, I said again, and he nodded. You will give me? He asked, seemingly surprised that I agreed so easily, and I felt like laughing. Yes. Give me your email address, and I will send the birth certificate to you through email. You can go and confirm wherever you want to see if he is yours or not, I replied, and I saw his face fall. He must have raised his hopes so high that his disappointment was written all over his face. He grunted as he looked at me. So, you mean the boy is truly not mine? He asked, but his voice was low and void of life as it used to be. Of course. I told you he is a product of a one-night stand. I had a one-night stand with a stranger in a club in London and had him. What else do you want to hear? I questioned, and I could feel his sadness increase. I could feel he was still doubting my words, but he no longer had any evidence that the baby could be his. I could see that he was already convinced that the baby couldn't be his, which was a good thing. You should leave now. Tomorrow is Julius's birthday, and I don't want him to start asking unreasonable questions again. Also, I don't want you to come around at all. I don't want to see you at the birthday, and you shouldn't call me at all because the last thing I want is for my son's birthday to be interrupted. I warned him, and he sucked in a deep breath. He stared at me for a while before he sighed again and took a step back. Sure. I won't have a business there, and I won't show up. Just send me the birth certificate and, he turned to leave but suddenly turned back to face me again. Don't think that I've believed you because I'm still going to run the DNA test. I will return after his birthday to do that, and then I won't stop at anything. I will surely run the test to find out if he is my son or not, he said, and I glared at him. I wanted to convince him more by saying more hurtful words that would break his heart, but I held myself back and rolled my eyes. I scoffed and crossed my arms. Suit yourself, I said and looked away. He stared at me for a while longer before he opened his car door, entered, and looked at me again. I'm leaving, he said and closed the door. I watched him start his engine, and he drove away. It was only after he left that I was able to take a step forward from my spot and I grunted. This is bad, I said to Lolita, but she refused to answer me, and I entered the house. I walked toward the stairs and saw Julius staring down at me from the highest stairs, and my eyes widened. I had totally forgotten that he was waiting for me, and seeing him that way reminded me of what I did to him earlier. I had yelled at him, and I knew how much he hated to be yelled at. I climbed the stairs, feeling guilty as I got closer to him. My baby, I'm so sorry for yelling at you then. I'm sure you know Mum was just angry, right? I was so annoyed seeing you talk to that stranger. He stopped me and crossed his arms. I don't need your apology, Mum. Just tell me why you keep sending me away from that man. Are you sure he is not my dad? He asked, and my eyes widened. I bent down in front of him and shook my head. He is not your dad, I replied, and he sighed. Okay, how about you swear? Swear that he is not my dad, and I will believe you. My heart raced, and I felt bad, but I still smiled at him and opened my mouth. I swear that he is not your dad, I swore to him, and he nodded and left. Nora's POV. I woke up the following morning, feeling great and excited. It was my son's birthday, so I felt happier than usual. I climbed down from my bed and left the room. I had to be the first person to wish him. Entering his room, I realized he was already awake and staring at the door, probably waiting for me to come and wish him. I revealed a smile as I walked toward him. Good morning, Mum, he greeted as I sat beside him. I helped him sit up in his bed, kissed his forehead, and hugged him. Happy birthday, my son. It's the beginning of a wonderful year, baby. Mommy is proud to have you, I said to him as I broke the hug and kissed his forehead again. Thanks, Mum. I'm happy to have you too. I love you, Mum, he said, and my heart melted. I hugged him again and stroked his hair. Mommy loves you more, darling, I said to him and broke the hug again. Are you ready for the day? I asked cheerfully, and he laughed. Of course, Mum. I can't be more ready, he joked, earning himself a low chuckle from me. I removed the blanket that I had covered him with last night to reveal his legs. I was about to help him out of bed when I remembered something and stopped. Are you happy with the small birthday party that we will be having this year? I know I've always celebrated it well for you, but this time around, we will be throwing a small party. Are you excited? I asked him, a little worried about his feelings regarding the birthday preparations. He smiled at me and nodded. Sure, Mum. I'm excited. I like everything you do for me because I know you love me so much, he replied, warming my heart again. Julius was the most precious gift to me, and I was glad to have him in my life. Don't worry, son. I will make sure you enjoy the party, I assured him, and he nodded. Again, I'm sorry we're not celebrating your birthday in London this year. Your friends aren't here, so they won't be attending. I'm sorry, my boy, I said to him, but he only shrugged and looked at me with clear and excited eyes. Don't worry about me, Mum. I'm perfectly fine with this party. I'm fine with my friends not coming either, he replied. That's why you're Mom's best boy. I cheered, and he laughed. He suddenly stopped laughing and looked at me. Mum, he called, and I frowned as I stared back at him. Whatever he wanted to say seemed serious, and I wondered what it could be. Where is my gift? Will you bring it for me today? He asked, and my heart sank. I knew what he was asking about, but I feigned ignorance and gave him a questioning look. What do you mean? Which gift is that? I asked, but before he could reply, I slapped my forehead gently and giggled. My bad. I will get you a big gift later in the evening, okay? I said to him, but he shook his head. He wasn't going to buy my lies. I told you I don't need any gift, Mum. Just show me my dad, and I will be all right for the day. The only gift I want is seeing my father, he explained to me. Even though his voice was calm, I could sense his frustration, and I knew he wasn't pleased with me. I thought about what to say for a while before letting out a deep breath and placing my hands on his shoulders. I know you want to see your dad, but why don't you relax for now, enjoy your birthday, and let's talk about that later in the evening. I tried persuading him, and he agreed. Okay then. We will talk about it again in the evening, he replied, and I smiled at him, relieved that he agreed with me. I nodded and looked around the room for a moment before returning my attention to him. Your birthday clothes are in the wardrobe. Would you like me to help you bathe, or will you do that yourself? I asked since he was quite particular. He looked at me and made a small pout. Do you think I'm a baby? I'm a big boy now, Mum. I can bathe myself, he said, and I laughed. I stood up from his bed, bent down to kiss his forehead again, and said, I'm leaving now. I'll be back. I need to check on the preparations downstairs. We can't afford to make any mistakes on my prince's birthday, can we? He laughed and replied, of course. Make sure everything is perfect. With that, I left the room. Walking down the stairs, my eyes lit up when I saw Maxwell and some people decorating the area where the party would take place. Good morning, Maxwell, I greeted, and he smiled. Good morning, Nora. Did you sleep well? He asked, and I nodded. Good morning, everyone, I greeted those in the room, and they responded. I looked around the room again and was impressed. They were almost done, but there were still a few things that needed more attention. I walked toward the table where the cake would be placed and began decorating it. Maxwell, how about the cake? I asked, and he turned to face me. They're working on it. It should be ready soon, he said, and I nodded. I continued decorating the table and humming to myself when I received a signal through the mind link. Madison. I called out loud and frowned. What is it this time? I asked, feeling annoyed by the interruption. I've received the email you sent to me, he said, and I rolled my eyes. So? Does the certificate make it clear to you now that the boy is not yours? Will you believe me now and stop pestering my life with your absurd speculations? I questioned him, annoyance in my voice, and he fell silent for a moment. So, you were telling the truth when you said the boy is not mine. The child is really not mine? He is really a product of a one-night stand, he inquired, and I felt a knot in my stomach, but I suppressed my anger and responded. Yes. He is not yours, Madison, I replied, chuckling to myself. I know his father, and you are not his father. I hope you can be at peace with yourself now and stop troubling yourself with unnecessary matters, I said, ending the mind link. I continued decorating the remaining items with the others, and about 30 minutes later, we were done. We should go and take our baths now, I said to Maxwell, who agreed. Yes, but I need to check on Julius first, he replied, and I nodded before heading to my room. A few hours later, people were arriving for the birthday party. The few people we invited had already arrived with their well wishes and gifts. The room was getting crowded, and I was pleased. Hey, Nora! I heard Dora's voice, and my eyes widened. She rushed toward me and hugged me tightly. It's been so long. How have you been? She questioned, and I laughed. I've been very well. How about you? I asked in return, and she turned around for me to see. She was glowing and looking even prettier. Life must have been treating her well, which made me happy for her. We were still discussing and catching up on the things we've missed in each other's lives when Maxwell came downstairs with Julius. We sang a long and hearty birthday song for him, and I could feel his excitement. He was smiling so brightly that I felt joyous just looking at him. Your son is so handsome, Dora complimented, and I agreed with her. Staring at him closely, one would realize that he looked like Madison and also a little bit like me, which made me very proud. I was still gazing at my son when I felt a familiar presence in the room. I turned my head only to see Alpha Leo in the room. I was surprised, and I walked toward him and bowed. You're here. It's so nice to have you here, Alpha Leo, I said to him politely, and he smiled. Yeah, I'm happy to be here too, he replied. Julius walked toward us and greeted him. Your son? He looks so handsome, he commented, and I smiled. Julius smiled too and came to stand beside me. I was still discussing with Alpha Leo when Madison entered the room, and my eyes widened. I was stunned for a moment, but I quickly composed myself. I pulled Julius to stand behind me, but he was staring at Madison, just as I was staring at him. He stood on the other side of the room and stared back at us. What are you doing here? I asked him through our mind link, and he shrugged. I'm here because Julius invited me, he replied, and I frowned. I wanted to go and send him away, but I didn't want to create a scene either, so I decided to let him be. I would talk to him when the party comes to an end. It's time to cut the cake, Julius said to me as he walked toward the stage. He picked up the knife and was about to cut the cake when he suddenly dropped the knife and slumped to the floor. Writer's POV. For a few seconds after Julius slumped, no one in the room moved forward to him as they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The first person to move forward with trembling lips was Nora. She rushed to her son and knelt in front of him. She tried to make him sit, but he kept falling back, and tears rolled down her eyes. Julius, she called, but there was no response. She closed her eyes, with trembling fingers, she tried healing him but felt something blocking her off, and she had no idea what it was. She opened her eyes and looked at him again. Julius? Mum is here, she said, but he wasn't responding still, and her tears kept rolling down her face. What do I do? What do I do? My ability isn't working. I can't heal him, she cried, trying to figure out what to do. She tried healing him again, but the same thing kept blocking her, and she whimpered. Madison, who had his feet rooted to the ground after witnessing Julius falling and laying unconscious, finally regained his composure when he saw Nora crying while hugging him with fear in her eyes. He rushed toward them and fell to his knees. He gently released the boy from Nora and placed his hands on his head to heal him, but it was still the same. Well, he was still healing, so he was a bit weak. Let's take him to the hospital. We should take him there now, he said and stood up. Without waiting for Nora to say word, he carried Julius from the ground and made his way to the exit of the house. Let's use my car, Leo suggested, as he had run after Madison the moment he left the room. Madison did not bother questioning him, and he ran toward his car. Leo opened the car, giving way for Madison to put Julius in the back seat while he entered the driver's seat, sat behind the wheel, and started the engine after he saw Madison in the car beside Julius. They did not wait for Nora to join them before they rushed him to the hospital. What's wrong with him? The nurses in front of the hospital tried to ask Madison when they saw him carrying the unconscious Julius, but he had no time to reply to them. Give way! He hollered as he ran into the hospital with Julius in his arms. He took him to a room, and a few seconds later, a doctor entered with Leo. When Madison was running in with Julius, Leo went to call for a doctor, and he came in on time. What happened to him? The doctor asked as he checked Julius's pulse. He just slumped and fainted. We have no idea what happened to him, Madison explained, and the doctor frowned. Okay. Can you leave the room, please? You are panicking so much, and we need a relaxed place to treat him. The doctor asked politely. As he was talking, the door opened, and 2 more doctors entered with 4 nurses behind them. Madison looked at them and sighed. Okay, he said and left the room. His heart was beating so loudly that he feared it would burst out of his chest. He wondered why he was so scared when the boy wasn't his, but he couldn't control his emotions. He felt scared, worried, and troubled about the whole thing, while he desperately hoped the boy would be fine. Where is my son? Nora asked the moment she reached Madison and Leo. With the way she was breathing, it was obvious she had been running, and she was tired. Her sweat kept dropping from her forehead, and her breathing was haggard, but her deepest worry was her son. She looked at the 2 men with wary eyes. Where is Julius? She asked again, and Madison turned to face her. He is being attended to by the doctors. He will be fine, he said to her, but her tears only rolled down her face. She rested against the wall and ran her fingers through her hair as more tears rolled down. She was scared, so worried about what might have happened to her son and what would be her fate. Madison saw her crying and felt bitter. He felt the urge to comfort her, but he knew that wasn't a good idea. Talking to her at that moment might anger her, and he didn't want that. So he just turned to look away while his worries intensified. Leo stood up from his seat and walked toward Nora. It's okay. He will be fine, he said comfortingly, and Nora moved closer to him. Without saying a word, she hugged him and cried on his shoulder. It's okay. It's okay. He comforted her softly, patting her back gently while she continued crying. The door opened, and the first doctor who attended to them earlier came out. Madison, Nora, Leo, and Maxwell rushed toward him. How is he? How is the boy? Madison was the first to reach him and asked. The doctor stopped walking and sighed. He is fine. His health is stable now, and he is sleeping, but there is a problem. The doctor announced, confusing the group in front of him, who were already excited that Julius was fine. What do you mean, doctor? Nora questioned, staring at the doctor with a curious gaze. The doctor was quiet for a while before he sighed again. The boy needs a bone marrow transplant. We need to find a donor whose bone marrow will be compatible with his, he said as his eyes scanned the people in front of him. Does he have older or younger siblings we can test? He asked, and Nora shook her head. No, doctor. I'm his mother, and I can do it for him. Test me, please. She pleaded, and the doctor nodded. The door opened, and a doctor came out. Please take this woman for a test. Check if her bone marrow is compatible with the patient's. The doctor said to the one who had just come out. The doctor turned to face Nora and smiled. Come with me, please. He said, and Nora nodded. She looked at Maxwell, who nodded at her, and she took a deep breath. I'm coming, she said to no one in particular, and followed the doctor. She was taken to a room where the test was performed. She closed her eyes, and an injection pierced her arm, making her fall asleep. By the time she woke up, the test had been carried out, and she felt relieved. You should wait outside while we wait for the result, Ma, the doctor said to her, and she nodded. She was about to leave the room when she suddenly stopped and turned to face the doctor again. Please, how long will it take for the result to come out? I want my son to be fine as soon as possible. You see, today is his birthday, and I don't want it to end with him still lying unconscious there, she pleaded with teary eyes. She felt sorry for her son. She felt so bad for him that she wished there was something else she could do for him besides the bone marrow transplant. She wanted him to be fine as soon as possible. The doctor nodded. He seemed to understand Nora, and he sympathized with her too. Just a few hours. We don't want it to take too long because the patient needs to be operated on as soon as possible. He is still very young, so we need to do whatever we must do on time, the doctor replied, and Nora nodded. She bowed her head a little to the doctor as a gesture of appreciation and a desperate plea of a mother who wished to save her son. She left the room and returned to the rest. How was it? Maxwell was the first to ask. He rushed toward her, held her hand, and led her back to her earlier spot while he continued looking at her face with a worried gaze. Nora leaned against the wall. She did not want to sit down because she felt like she would be doing something wrong by sitting down when her son was so sick and lying unconscious on the hospital bed. It was fine. I've been asked to wait for the results. The doctor should be here soon, she replied to Maxwell, who nodded his head. Leo walked back to her and sat in the seat beside her. Why don't you sit? He asked, but Nora shook her head and closed her eyes. A few hours later, the doctor came out of one of the hospital rooms and walked toward them. Miss Nora, I'm sorry, but your bone marrow is not compatible with the patient's. So, we can't use yours. However, we are sure the father will be compatible. Where is he? He asked, and Nora's heart sank. She looked around awkwardly, trying to gather her thoughts as she felt cornered. Must it be the father? She asked the doctor, who nodded his head. Not necessarily, but I don't think we should waste more time trying to test others. We should just test the father and start with the surgery. We don't have much time, the doctor announced and looked at the men behind Nora. Look for the father, or is he among these three men? He asked, and Nora frowned. She knew she had no way to deny the truth anymore, and she nodded her head. Yes, the father is here, she replied. Lord Madison's POV. The father is here. Nora's words made my eyes widen, and I was shocked. I had always thought the baby could be mine, but it never dawned on me that he could really be mine. Hearing her say that the father was among us made me nervous, and I couldn't wait for her to turn to me. I lowered my eyes to look at her face, and I saw her turn to Leo. Leo? My heart started racing. I was scared and troubled. Could the boy be Leo's? Could Leo be the father? I stared at the two of them without saying a word. Well, even if I wanted to, I couldn't say a word anyway because I was just too scared. If the baby was Leo's, then it meant that she would go to him, and they would get married. What would become of me then? I didn't want to think about it, but my heart kept racing. I was expecting her to talk when she turned to face me. Does she want to announce to me that the father is Leo? She shouldn't say it. She will be breaking my heart that way, I said to Darren, who didn't say a word in response. Madison, Nora called, and I looked at her. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words were coming out. All I wanted was for her not to tell me that the boy was Leo's. I feared I wouldn't be able to take it, and it would break me down for real. Madison, Julius is yours. He is your son, she mumbled. My eyes twitched. I was stunned, I was bewildered, I couldn't think straight, and I knew I had heard wrong. She wouldn't have said that now, would she? I looked at her and shook my head. I needed to calm my over-racing heart. What? What did you say? I asked, and she sighed. Julius is your son, Madison. You are his father, she said again, and I gasped. I staggered backward and only stopped myself after I took a few feet away from her. I covered my mouth with my hand, and I couldn't wrap my head around my thoughts. My free hand ran through my hair as I returned my gaze to her. How? How is that possible? I asked her, with disbelief in my eyes. How is that possible? How come? I kept asking. Tears rolled down her face, and she shook her head. Now is not the time for this, please. You can listen to the explanation later, but right now, we need to save our baby. Go in there and test if your bone marrow matches with his, please, she pleaded, but I still was eager to know more. I wasn't able to think of anything else apart from what she said to me earlier. I was about to ask her how again when the doctor moved forward. Please come with me. We can't waste any more time, or we will be putting the patient in danger, the doctor said, and I nodded. I should go and do what is necessary first and ask her questions later. I was still surprised and found it hard to believe, but I followed the doctor anyway, and he led me to the room he took Nora to earlier. They carried out the test and told me to return to my spot to wait for the result, which I did. I couldn't wait to ask her questions anyway, so I quickly did as told, while also hoping that my bone marrow would match with the boy. I walked toward them and saw Nora crying, while Maxwell was consoling her. Will you explain to me now? I feel like I'm losing my mind. How can this be real? I asked her, and that was exactly how I felt at that moment. She turned to look at me, and she sucked in a deep breath. After the test we conducted then, I had to go back because I felt some pains in my belly, and that was when, she stopped and wiped the tears on her face with the back of her hand, but more fell through. I found out that the result that was first given to us wasn't real. The child was still alive and well in my belly. I don't know how it happened, but I gave birth to him 8 months after I left you, she explained, and it was like my time had stopped. I felt my heart clench, and tears trickled down my eyes. My legs kept moving backward without my consent, and I couldn't help but shake my head in disbelief. No. Why? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep it all to yourself? Why didn't you let me know? I asked with a pained voice, as more tears rolled down my eyes. How could you hide my son away from me? How could you do this to me, Nora? Because of your hate and anger toward me. Because you hate me, you made me lose 4 years of my son's life. Because of the mistake I made. Fine. I understand that you don't want to be with me anymore after that mistake, but how could you punish that little child so much? How could you do this to us, Nora? I asked. My emotions were getting out of my control, and even my voice seemed to be cracking. I wanted to yell to the sky, transform and run to a faraway place where I could cry my heart out, as it was just too painful for me. Leo walked over to me and made a concerned face. You need to calm down, Madison. You should, I cut him off with a wave of my hand. Stop. Just stop. Don't tell me to calm down. Will you tell me you didn't know about this? I'm sure you did and you didn't tell me. I was in pain for the past 4 years, wallowing in regret, cursing myself for killing my child due to my stupidity. Oh, how much I had cursed and hated myself thinking the child is dead when he is actually alive and living well. How could you two do this to me? What have I done so bad to deserve this much hatred? I asked, tears still rolling down my eyes. Leo was about to talk when the doctor walked over to us and bowed a little. Congratulations! The bone marrow matches, and we can go on with the operation now. Shall we do that right away? The doctor announced, and I was elated. I felt overjoyed, and I closed my eyes for some seconds to steady my emotions before I opened them back. Can I ask you a question, doctor? I asked the doctor, who nodded his head. Of course. You can ask me any question. He replied. He seemed to be in a good mood too after getting a donor for his patient. I'm a healer. So I'm hoping I can heal him by myself after the surgery. I don't want him to go through pain and all. I would like to heal the cut myself after you've placed the bone marrow in him. Is that okay? I asked, hoping they would agree. I didn't want to see my son going through discomfort. Sure. We will let you do that, the doctor assured me, and I nodded. Come with me, please, he said, and I nodded. I turned to look at Nora, who was staring at me with teary eyes, and Leo, who seemed to feel guilty. Maxwell kept patting Nora's shoulder, and I returned my attention to the doctor. Let's go, I said to him, and with that, we both left for the surgery. A few hours later, I came out of the surgery room, feeling a little exhausted. Nora rushed to me with a panic-stricken face. How was the surgery? Was it successful? She asked, but I was in no mood to reply to her. I walked past her and sat down on a seat beside Leo. I stayed quiet like that for a few more minutes, and the doctors came out. I raised my head to look at them and saw Nora rushing to them. How was it? How is my son? Is he okay? She asked, her voice laced with genuine concern, and I grunted. The doctor smiled at her. Yes, madam. Your son is fine, and the surgery was successful. He is asleep right now, but he should be okay by the time he wakes up, and he should be discharged in a few days too. He sustained no injury or scar because his wound was completely healed by his father. So, everything is fine, the doctor explained, and I sighed in relief. Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much, Nora kept muttering as the doctor bowed and left. We all returned to our seats, waiting for Julius to wake up while we were all in deep thought. Everyone had one thing or the other to think about, and we were all busy with it. I was still angry, too. A nurse walked over and bowed. He is awake now. You can go and see him, she announced, and we all rushed toward the room to see Julius. He was lying in bed, but he turned to face us the moment he noticed our presence. Mum, he called, and Nora ran to him. How are you? Are you okay? She asked, and he nodded. I also walked toward him with tears in my eyes. Are you okay? I asked, and he nodded. Yes, sir, he replied, but I was displeased. Don't call me sir, call me daddy, okay? I said to him with a pained voice. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description.